Oh, hello there, dear. Come in, come in. Don't just stand there in the doorway. Find a comfy spot. The rain is really coming down today, isn't it? It's a fine day for a story, I think. The sound of it, that gentle drumming on the window pane, it always takes me back. 2 sugars for you. That's it. Let me just, there. It's funny, the things we hold on to, not just the big, shiny trophies or the fancy china, but the little things. The forgotten things tucked away in the dark corners of a drawer. I was looking for a spare button this morning, rummaging through that old sewing box my mother gave me, the one that smells of cedar and thyme, and my fingers, they brushed against something cold and metallic. Nan opens her hand to reveal a small, tarnished silver locket, overshaped and smooth from years of handling. It's not ornate, but it feels heavy with history. It's not much to look at now, I suppose. The shine has long since faded, and there's a little dent on the side here. See, but this little piece of silver. Oh my, this locket holds the heaviest secret I've ever had to carry. It taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't about telling the truth, but about knowing which truths are meant to be borne alone. It all started on a day just like this, gray and full of a quiet sadness. It was the autumn of 1965. The air had that crisp, smoky smell of burning leaves, and the platform of the Grand Oak station was bustling. Oh, the noise, the hiss of the steam from the train, the porters shouting, the frantic goodbyes of families. But for me, all that noise was a dull hum in the background. The only thing I could truly see, truly focus on, was my brother, Arthur. He looked so handsome in his uniform, so tall and sure of himself. But I knew him. I saw the slight tremor in his hands when he lit a cigarette, the way his eyes darted towards the clock, then back to me, then to our parents, who were trying so terribly hard to be brave. He was just 22, just a boy, really, sent off to a place none of us could even properly find on a map. Vietnam, they called it, a word that felt foreign and sharp on the tongue. He was my big brother, the one who taught me how to ride a bicycle by letting me scrape my knees a dozen times without ever letting go completely. The one who'd sneak me an extra biscuit from the tin when mother wasn't looking. We had a language all our own, a shorthand of raised eyebrows and knowing glances, and in that moment, on that loud, chaotic platform, his eyes were screaming a message I couldn't quite decipher. Fear, yes, but something else, a desperate plea. Just before the final whistle blew, he pulled me aside. The wool of his uniform was rough against my cheek as he hugged me tight. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He was the only one who ever called me Ellie. "Ellie, I need you to promise me something." He pulled this very locket from his pocket. It was brand new then, so shiny you could see your reflection in it. He pressed it into my palm, and its coolness was a shock against my skin. "There's a girl," he said, his words rushed. "Her name is Lillian Croft. She means everything to me. Ellie, I didn't bring her here. Couldn't, it would have been too hard. But I need to know someone is looking out for her. The letters, they might get slow. Things might get complicated. Promise me you'll be her friend. Promise me you'll make sure she's never alone." I remember the weight of it in my hand. It felt impossibly heavy, like it was filled not with space for a photograph, but with the entire weight of his heart, his fear, his hope. "I promise, Arthur," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "I promise." He gave me one last, desperate squeeze. "Don't let her forget me," he said. And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd of soldiers climbing aboard the train. I stood there, long after the train had pulled away, its whistle, a mournful cry fading into the distance. I stood there until my hand was numb, clutching a silver locket and a promise that would come to define the rest of my life. I had no idea, not a single clue, what that simple promise would one day ask of me. For the first few months, keeping my promise to Arthur felt simple enough. His letters arrived almost every week, thin, blue airmail envelopes that felt as fragile as hope itself. His handwriting, usually so bold and confident, was small and cramped, as if he were trying to fit a whole world of thoughts onto one page. He wrote about the heat, the strange insects, the endless waiting. But mostly, he wrote about Lily. "Did you meet her yet, Ellie?" he'd ask in every other letter. "She works at Henderson's bookstore on Main Street. She loves poetry. Keats is her favorite. She has a laugh that sounds like wind chimes. Tell me what she's like when you see her. Tell me she's all right." I'll admit, I was hesitant. I was a shy girl back then, walking up to a stranger and saying, "Hello, my brother who is in love with you asked me to be your friend," it felt impossibly awkward. For weeks, I'd walk past the bookstore, peering through the glass like a little mouse, my heart thumping in my chest. I'd see a flash of honey blonde hair behind a stack of books, and my courage would fail me. She wasn't what I expected. From Arthur's letters, I had pictured someone delicate, a fragile flower, but the girl I saw through the window was vibrant. She moved with a purpose, her brow often furrowed in concentration as she stocked shelves or spoke with customers. She seemed self-contained, a world unto herself. Finally, one rainy Tuesday, clutching a letter from Arthur that was particularly insistent, I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. A little bell tinkled overhead, a cheerful sound that was at odds with the frantic beating of my heart. The shop smelled wonderfully of old paper and leather and lemon polish, and there she was, standing on a small stepladder, reaching for a book on a high shelf. She wore a simple blue dress, and her hair was tied back with a ribbon. When she turned and saw me, her eyes, the color of moss after a spring rain, were inquisitive. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice wasn't like wind chimes. It was lower than I expected, and steady. My own voice came out as a squeak. I'm Elara Mayhew." Her expression didn't change. The name meant nothing to her. Of course it didn't. "I'm Arthur's sister," I added, and that's when everything shifted. Her composure cracked just a little. A flicker of something surprise, hope, fear crossed her face. She stepped down from the ladder carefully. "Arthur's sister," she repeated, softly. He writes about you," I stammered, feeling my cheeks grow hot. "He asked me to come and say hello, to make sure you were—" I trailed off, unsure how to finish. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face, transforming her. It was a guarded smile, but it was genuine. "He's a worrier," she said, and in that moment, I saw the girl Arthur had fallen for. "It's lovely to meet you, Elara." Our first meeting was a stilted affair. We made small talk over the counter, the conversation punctuated by the ringing of the bell as customers came and went. She asked about my parents, I asked about the bookstore. It was polite, but there was a wall between us, the wall of her fierce loyalty to Arthur and my own shyness. I started visiting every week. I'd buy a book I didn't need just to have an excuse to talk to her for 10 minutes. I told Arthur in my letters that she was well, that we were becoming friends, and it was only a small white lie. We were becoming acquaintances, friendly ones, but the deep connection he'd hoped for wasn't there yet. She held her heart close, pouring all of her hope and fear into her own letters to him, and I was just an observer, a messenger of sorts. Then, one cold January morning, I realized it had been 3 weeks since Arthur's last letter. Before, he had never gone more than 10 days. I told myself it was nothing. The post could be slow. He was probably on a mission, away from the base. But a week later, there was still nothing. Lily noticed it too. The light in her eyes began to dim. The question hung unspoken between us every time I entered the shop. "Have you heard anything?" she'd ask with her eyes, and I'd have to give a small, sad shake of my head. The silence from across the ocean was becoming a roar, a terrifying, deafening roar that filled every waking moment, and I was beginning to realize that my promise to Arthur was about to become far more difficult than just buying a book once a week. The days that followed are a blur, a watercolor painting left out in the rain. There were hushed phone calls, a house suddenly full of neighbors, bearing casseroles and sorrowful eyes. My father, a man I'd never seen cry, sat in his armchair, staring at nothing, his face aged a decade overnight. My mother moved like a ghost through the rooms, her grief a heavy, suffocating shroud, and me, I had to be the strong one. I had to make the phone call I had been dreading more than anything in my life. I remember my hand shaking so badly I could barely dial the number for the bookstore. When Lily answered, her voice full of its usual, gentle warmth, a sob caught in my throat. "Lily," I managed to choke out. Can you close the shop? I need you to come over." She knew. She didn't ask why. She just said, "I'm on my way." When she arrived at my house and saw the faces of my parents, she didn't need me to say the words. The truth was written all over our home. She collapsed into my arms, her body racked with a grief so profound it felt like it could shatter bone. We held each other and wept, 2 broken pillars trying to hold up the sky. In our shared sorrow, our bond deepened into something akin to sisterhood. I had promised Arthur I would look after her, and now, that promise was the only thing that felt real in a world that had lost all its meaning. About a month later, a small, wooden crate arrived, Arthur's personal effects. My father couldn't bring himself to open it, so it sat in the hallway for 3 days, a silent, painful monument. Finally, my mother and I decided we had to face it. We pried it open in the living room, the screech of the nails on wood echoing in the quiet house. Inside was his life, packed away, a few worn books, a harmonica, his spare uniform folded neatly. There were photographs of us, of his parents, and several of Lily, their corners soft from being handled so often. And at the very bottom, tucked beneath the sweater, was a small, unassuming cardboard box tied with string. My mother, her eyes full of tears, left the room. She couldn't bear any more. I sat there alone on the floor and, with trembling fingers, untied the string. Inside were letters, a thick stack of them, at least 20, all in his familiar handwriting. But they weren't for me, or for our parents. They were all addressed to Lily. My first thought was a rush of relief. More words from him, a last gift for the woman he loved. I imagined us reading them together, crying and laughing, another way to keep him close. But then I noticed something strange. None of them had been mailed. They were all sealed, but unscanned. I opened the one on top, my curiosity getting the better of me. The date was from just a few weeks before he was gone. "My dearest Lily," it began. My heart ached at the sight of his script. But as I read on, the words on the page began to blur and swim, my blood turning to ice in my veins. This was not a love letter. It was a goodbye. He wrote about the horrors he was seeing, the way the war was changing him, hollowing him out. He wrote that he no longer felt like the boy who had left that train station. He was a ghost, he said, and he couldn't bear the thought of haunting her life. He wrote that she deserved a future, a real one, with a whole man, not the broken pieces of one who might not even return. He was going to break up with her. He was setting her free. I tore open another, and another. They were all the same, different drafts of the same heartbreaking letter. He had clearly been wrestling with this decision for months, writing it out over and over, unable to bring himself to send it. He loved her so much that he was willing to break his own heart, and hers, to give her a chance at happiness. I sat there on the floor, the world tilting on its axis. The air was thick with the scent of cedar from his clothes and the ink of his devastating words. Lily was upstairs in my room, asleep, exhausted from grief. She was clinging to the memory of their perfect love, a love she believed was eternal, a love that was going to last a lifetime. It was the only thing keeping her afloat. And in my hands, I held the truth, a truth so painful, so utterly shattering. It would not only destroy her idealized memory of the man she loved, but would also invalidate the very foundation of her grief. It would take away the one thing she had left. My promise to Arthur echoed in my mind. "Look after her," he had said. "Make sure she's never alone." What did that mean now? Did it mean telling her the harsh, cruel truth because it was real? Or did it mean protecting her from a pain that Arthur himself could never bring himself to inflict? The weight of those letters in my lap was heavier than any grief I had ever known. The silence stretched from 1 week into 2, then a month, then 6 agonizing weeks. The seasons began to change, the last of the winter frost melting into a damp, uncertain spring. But in our little world, everything was frozen. The waiting was a physical thing. It sat on my chest, making it hard to breathe. It was in the pit of my stomach, a constant, churning dread. Every morning, I'd watch our postman, Mr. Gable, make his way down the street, my heart pounding in a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I'd pray to see that thin blue airmail envelope in his hand, and every day, my shoulders would slump as he passed our house with nothing but bills and circulars. The disappointment was a fresh wave of grief each time. It was during this time that the wall between Lily and me finally crumbled. My weekly visits to the bookstore were no longer just a duty. They were a necessity for us both. We didn't need to speak about the fear. It was the third person in the room, a silent specter that followed us through the aisles of books. We'd talk about everything and nothing, the dreary weather, a funny customer, the plot of a new novel, all in a desperate attempt to fill the terrifying silence left by Arthur. One afternoon, I found her in the small back room of the shop, sitting on a stool, just staring at a wall. She wasn't crying. It was something worse than crying. Her face was pale and empty, her moss-green eyes vacant. She was holding a crumpled letter from Arthur, one of his last, paper worn soft from her constant touch. I didn't say a word. I just pulled up another stool, sat beside her, and took her hand. It was as cold as a stone. We sat like that, for what must have been an hour, in complete silence, surrounded by the scent of aging paper. But in that shared silence, a true friendship was finally forged. We were no longer just Arthur's sister and Arthur's girl. We were two young women, terrified and united in our love for one person so very far away. From that day on, we were inseparable. We were a team. We took long walks after she closed the shop, our conversations now circling the topic we'd so carefully avoided. We'd share stories about him, piecing together a more complete picture of the boy we both adored. I told her about his disastrous attempt to build a treehouse. She told me about their first date at the county fair. We were keeping him alive between us with our memories. By the way, dear, as I sit here telling you all this, it makes me wonder about you. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Is the sun shining, or is it raining, like it is here? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little friendlier. You know, well, as spring bloomed, a fragile, cautious hope began to bloom in our hearts too. We convinced ourselves that no news was good news, that he was on a long, covert mission and would write the second he could. We made plans for his return, a big welcome home party, a picnic by Miller's Pond. We allowed ourselves to dream of the future, a future where the three of us were together. It was a Tuesday in late April. The sun was finally out, shining with a weak but welcome warmth. The tulips in my mother's garden were bright spots of red and yellow. I was helping her hang the laundry in the backyard, the scent of clean sheets filling the air, when I saw it. A dark green army car, official and ominous, turning slowly onto our street. My blood ran cold. The clothespin I was holding slipped from my fingers and fell to the grass. My mother stopped what she was doing, her hand flying to her mouth. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp. The car crawled down the lane, a predator stalking its prey. It drove past the Miller's house, then the Thompsons, and then it stopped. It stopped right in front of our gate. Two men in immaculate uniforms got out. They moved with a somber, practiced grace that spoke of a duty they had performed too many times before. One was an older, graying officer, his face a mask of solemn compassion. The other was a young chaplain, his face pale, clutching a Bible in his hands. I didn't need them to say a word. In that single, heart-stopping moment, I knew. The silence from across the ocean had finally been broken, and its message was the one we had feared all along. Arthur was not coming home. And my first thought, after the wave of shock and nausea, was of Lily. How in God's name was I going to tell Lily? For a week, I was a ghost in my own home. I hid the box of letters in the bottom of my wardrobe, beneath my winter sweaters, but it was no use. I could feel their presence from across the house. They were a throbbing, physical ache in my soul. Every time I looked at Lily, my heart twisted with the secret I was keeping. Her grief was pure. It was a monument to a perfect, untarnished love, tragically cut short. She spoke of Arthur as a saint, a martyr. She would reread his old, beautiful letters, the ones filled with promises of a future together, and she would weep, but her tears were clean. They were tears for a future that was stolen, not for a love that was dying. How could I taint that? How could I look into her trusting, sorrowful eyes and say, "The man you are mourning was planning to leave you"? I spent hours walking through the woods behind our house, the crunch of leaves under my feet the only sound. I tried to reason it out. Honesty, wasn't that the foundation of true friendship? She deserved the truth, didn't she? To know the real man, flaws and all. A part of me, a stern, moral part, argued that a relationship built on a lie, even a posthumous one, was no relationship at all. It was a fantasy, and she deserved reality. But then I would picture her face. I would see her, sitting in the bookstore, her expression vacant with loss, and I would think of Arthur's words. He was a ghost. He had written. He didn't want to haunt her. If I gave her those letters, I wouldn't be giving her the truth. I would be unleashing his ghost, a tormented, conflicted ghost, to haunt her for the rest of her days. She would forever question if his love had been real, if any of it had been real. She would wonder what she had done wrong. The what-ifs would eat her alive. My promise wasn't to be a purveyor of facts. My promise was to look after her. And in that moment, trudging through the damp, earthy-smelling woods, I understood. Looking after her meant protecting her heart. It meant shouldering a burden so she wouldn't have to. It meant honoring Arthur's final, unspoken wish, the wish he couldn't bring himself to enact, but had laid bare in those unsent pages. He wanted her to be free, to be happy. The cruel irony was that his death had freed her from his decision, preserving their love in perfect, tragic amber. Who was I to smash that? That night, after everyone was asleep, I made my decision. The house was silent except for the groaning of its old bones and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick marking a second of my resolve. I crept to my wardrobe and pulled out the cardboard box. It felt toxic in my hands, heavy with unspoken words and painful intentions. I carried it downstairs and out into the backyard. The moon was a pale sliver in the inky sky. There was a chill in the air. I went to the old incinerator barrel where my father burned the garden waste. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was clear. One by one, I took the letters out. I didn't reread them. I couldn't bear to. I just saw his handwriting, saw her name, and knew what I had to do. I lit a match. The tiny flame sputtered to life, a defiant spark in the vast darkness. For a moment, I hesitated. This felt like a betrayal of history, of the truth. But then I looked up at the window of my room, where Lily was sleeping, and I knew it was an act of love. I dropped the match into the barrel with the letters. They caught fire slowly at first, the edges curling and turning black. Then, a whoosh as the flames took hold, devouring the paper, turning Arthur's painful, secret words into smoke and ash that rose into the night sky. I watched until the last ember had died, until all that remained was a pile of gray dust. I was crying, but not for Arthur, not this time. I was crying for the weight of my choice, for the piece of myself I had just burned along with those letters. I had chosen my path. I would carry this secret for her, always. I went back inside, my hands smelling of smoke, my heart heavy but, for the first time in a week, settled. I had made my peace with the lie. I walked upstairs, feeling older and wearier. As I passed my room, I heard a small sound from within. I pushed the door open gently. Lily was awake, sitting up in bed, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Ellie," she whispered, her voice trembling. I think something's wrong. I feel sick." And then, with a look of dawning terror and wonder on her face, she looked at me and said the words that would change everything, all over again. "Ellie, I think I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air of the small bedroom, more shocking and more terrifying than the news of Arthur's death had been. Pregnant. It was a word that, in our small, conservative town in 1966, was a blessing inside the sanctity of marriage, and a life-ruining scandal outside of it. Lily's revelation sent a new kind of shockwave through our already fractured world. My decision to burn the letters, a choice that had felt so monumental only moments before, now seemed like a footnote in a much larger, more terrifying story. The secret I had just buried in ash was nothing compared to the secret that was now growing inside Lily's womb. The days that followed were a whirlwind of hushed, panicked conversations. Lily was terrified. Her parents were devout churchgoers, pillars of the community. The shame, she believed, would destroy them. She was convinced they would disown her. And for a while, it seemed like her fears were justified. My own parents were torn. They loved Lily. They had practically adopted her into our family through our shared grief. But this was different. I remember a conversation with my father in the kitchen, his voice low and strained. "Alara, you have to be sensible about this," he'd said, not looking at me, a baby, with no father. "People will talk. It will ruin her name. It will tarnish Arthur's memory." "It is Arthur's memory," I shot back, my voice rising with a fierceness that surprised even me. "It's the only part of him we have left. What do you want us to do? Send her away? Pretend it never happened?" The air was thick with unspoken, terrible options. Back then, there were homes for girls in Lily's situation. Places where they could disappear for a few months and the problem would be taken care of. The baby given up for adoption. The very thought made me feel sick. I thought of my promise to Arthur. Look after her. That promise had become my compass, my true north, in a world that had lost its bearings. Sending her away would be the ultimate betrayal of that promise. This was the moment my own girlhood ended. The shy, hesitant girl who was afraid to walk into a bookstore was gone. In her place was a woman I didn't recognize, one filled with a steel I didn't know I possessed. One evening, I gathered my parents and Lily in our living room. The ticking of the clock seemed to count down the seconds to our future. Lily was pale, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. My parents looked worried and exhausted. I took a deep breath. "This is what we're going to do," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Lily is going to stay here. We are going to have this baby, and we are going to raise it together. I will help her. We will be its family. It is Arthur's child, and it is a Mayhew." My father stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. My mother started to cry softly. Lily looked up at me, her green eyes wide with disbelief and a fragile, dawning hope. "But Ellie, your reputation, your life, you're my life now," I said, looking directly at her. "We're in this together. That's what sisters do." It was a battle. Oh dear, it was a battle. There were whispers in town, sideways glances in the grocery store. Some of my mother's friends stopped calling. Lily's parents, after a terrible, tear-filled confrontation, told her she had made her bed and would have to lie in it. They didn't disown her completely, but a cold, painful distance formed. But we had each other. We found a strength we never knew we had. I quit my job as a typist and took on extra sewing and mending work that I could do from home. Lily continued at the bookstore for as long as she could, her belly growing beneath loose-fitting dresses. We turned my small bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow. We were creating a world for this baby, a fortress built of our shared resolve and fierce love, to protect it from the judgment of the world outside. The struggle was immense, but in a strange way, it was a blessing. The raw, directionless grief we had felt for Arthur was now channeled into a purpose. We weren't just mourning what we had lost. We were building what he had left behind. We were fighting for his legacy, a living, breathing legacy. It wasn't the future any of us had planned, but it was a future nonetheless. We were no longer two young women defined by a loss. We were about to become mothers, and that took a different kind of courage altogether. The courage not just to endure, but to build. The months leading up to the birth were the hardest and most beautiful of my life. Our little town, with its curtain-twitching neighbors and gossiping circles, could be cruel. But for every judgmental stare, there was a quiet kindness. Mr. Henderson, the owner of the bookstore, never said a word about Lily's condition, and quietly paid her for weeks after she was unable to work. My mother, after her initial fear, became our fiercest defender, her love for her unborn grandchild overriding any concern for social standing. She would leave little meals outside our door, knit tiny blankets and sweaters, her silent way of showing her support. We had very little money. There were nights we ate nothing but toast and tea for dinner. We mended our clothes until they were more patch than fabric. But our little attic room, which we'd painted yellow, was always filled with light. We would read poetry aloud to Lily's swelling belly, convinced the baby could hear us. We would talk to him, telling him all about the brave, wonderful father he would never meet. We built our own little family within those four walls, a family forged in loss and love and defiance. In the early spring of 1967, Lily gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. He had a tuft of dark hair like Arthur's, and, when he opened his eyes, they were the same moss green as his mother's. They named him Arthur, of course, but we all called him Artie. Holding that tiny baby in my arms for the first time, every struggle, every whisper, every hardship just melted away. Here he was, a piece of my brother, a piece of my best friend, a living, breathing continuation of a love story that everyone thought had ended. In that moment, I finally understood my promise. Looking after Lily didn't just mean protecting her from a painful truth. It meant helping her build a beautiful, new one. The years that followed were a tapestry woven with struggle and joy. We moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment above the bakery, the constant smell of fresh bread a comforting presence. I got a job at the library, and Lily eventually went back to work at the bookstore. We raised Artie together. I was his auntie, Ellie, but in many ways, I was a second mother. I was there for his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. He was the son I never had, the center of our small, unconventional universe. Lily, my brave Lily, blossomed. She was a wonderful mother, full of laughter and strength. About 5 years later, a kind, gentle man named Frank started coming into the bookstore. He was a widower, a quiet man who taught history at the high school. He saw Lily not for her past, but for the incredible woman she was. He fell in love with her, and with her son. When they married, Artie was the ring bearer. Frank adopted him and loved him as his own. Lily finally got the future she deserved, a future filled with love, stability, and happiness. It wasn't the future she had dreamed of with Arthur, but it was a good, true one. She and Frank moved to a new town a few years later, for his job. It was hard to see them go, but it was right. Our little family unit had served its purpose. It had been a lifeboat, and now Lily and Artie had reached a safe shore. We still wrote, of course, and visited every summer. We were, and always will be, sisters. Nan picks up the tarnished silver locket again, turning it over in her palm. A soft, reminiscent smile plays on her lips. So, you see this old thing? For 60 years, I've kept my secret. I never told Lily about the letters I burned. She deserved to have her pure memory of her first love, the brave soldier who gave her the greatest gift of all. Telling her the truth would have served no one. It would not have changed the outcome, only clouded the past with pain. My silence was my final gift to both her and Arthur, and the locket. You know, Arthur gave it to me empty. He probably intended for me to put his picture in it, or maybe one of Lily, but I knew what it was really meant to hold. With a delicate movement, her old fingers press a nearly invisible clasp. The locket springs open. The camera zooms in. Inside, on one side, is not a picture of Arthur, but a tiny, faded, black and white photograph of a smiling baby with a tuft of dark hair. On the other side is a similar tiny photo of a young, radiant Lily. It doesn't hold a memory of what was lost. It holds the reason it was all worth it. It holds the beginning that came from the end. That's the thing about life, dear. We think it's a straight line, a story with a clear beginning, middle, and end. But it's not. It's a circle. It's love, and then loss, and then, if you're brave enough, love again. Promises are not simple things. Sometimes keeping them requires you to bend, to break your own rules, to find a deeper truth than the one that lies on the surface. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is to bear a burden quietly, so that someone else can walk in the sun. Now, how about another cup of tea? This one has gone a bit cold.